Everybody Hates Rand is a Wheel of Time podcast that will contain spoilers for all 14 books. So if you're anti-spoiler, stop this, read all 14 books, and come back. We'll be here, waiting.
Our title is a joke and is meant to be taken as such. Everybody in this context refers to us and our cats. You are free to feel however you want about Rand. He's a fictional character. Please don't DM us.
The world is a mess, Dark One stretching out his hand. The dragon's reborn, the fire's been fanned, but everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand.
Well, let's hop right in. This is Everybody Hates Rand, your friendly neighborhood Wheel of Time podcast. I'm Emily Jushaw.
And I'm Sally Goodrick.
Despite all evidence to the contrary.
Despite all publications to the contrary, naming me Sarah. That is not my name.
Sarah. There are multiple duosyllabic names that start with this syllable. And hers is Sally, as it says.
As it says.
In print everywhere.
Yeah.
Except in these places.
Except in a few key places, apparently.
Airing of grievances over. Sorry, I wanted to jump in because it occurred to me that I don't think there were any egg points of view in the last book.
In Winter's Heart?
I don't think there are, because I think the last time in the series that we saw her was in Path of Daggers, which means that we as a podcast have not discussed her point of view since Crown of Swords, which is quite a chunk of time.
It's a chunk of time.
Because I don't think anything happens between end of Path of Daggers, when she gets war powers.
Right.
And now, when we cut to them in Tarvalon.
Travel to Tarvalon, I think, and that's about it.
Yeah, I think we, through Elaine's point of view last book, saw her talk to Egg or something a couple times.
We're moving. We're on the march.
Yeah.
So yeah, that could be true.
So,
I think you're right.
Assuming that's true, then we've been neglecting Egg, because a lot of the bulk, I would say, of what happens in Path of Daggers has to do with the Aes Sedai arc. So we're playing catch-up here a little bit. When we last saw Egg on the podcast, she was still in Salidar, I believe, with all of the Salidar Aes Sedai. In Path of Daggers, all that happens is that they march forward quite a ways on foot, while Gareth Bryne is accumulating soldiers on the march. Talmanese and the Band of the Red Hand are following close behind as part of this scheme that Egg and the others cooked up, similar to the Borderlanders invading Andor to give Elaine support. The Band of the Red Hand is sticking close to Egg in order to inspire the Aes Sedai to get some forward momentum. But in Path of Daggers, we see Edwene transition from being this puppet Amyrlin seat, wherein sort of every Aes Sedai, it seems, believes that they personally are controlling her. From the various factions in the Hall of the Tower, who are primarily led by these two women named Ramonda and Lelaine, to this whole big faction we must have seen Egg at some point. Oh yeah, Crown of Swords, they were already on the march.
Yep, Crown of Swords, they were already on the march.
Yeah, because we saw her deal with Mirel and Lan coming back.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
that's in Crown of Swords.
That's in Crown of Swords. So we've already seen Elaine, boy, all the E names are really throwing me.
Tough.
We've already seen Edwene start to transition out of this and start to accumulate power in the form of Oaths of Fealty, which is very confusing.
Yeah, bizarre.
We've seen Moghedien escape, and her not really doing anything about that, because what can she do except maybe not have held one of the Forsaken captive to begin with, but to each their own. And we saw her with Siuan's help sort of starting to maneuver some power for herself. Anyway, in the last book, the big thing that happened was that she met with some of the Andoran nobility, not just her, a lot of the Aes Sedai, specifically the Andoran nobility that Elaine and Dylan are so worried about because they have not
Declared aside.
declared. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. They haven't declared for Elaine. They have declared for Dylan, but
Unfortunately, that's not really an official option.
yeah, sorry, it's sort of like writing in on the ballot, writing in Mickey Mouse on the
like Oprah to be president.
You know she'd do a good job at it, but
Yeah, but she's not
on the ballot. These are people who are all sort of congregated over on the Murundi Andor border, and officially Edwy and the Aes Sedai met with them, as well as some Morandian lords and ladies, to get permission, although of course the Aes Sedai would never call it that, to cross through their lands.
Right.
This was a, like, cool, snowy meeting out on the ice. The only notable thing about it was that Talmanes was there, like, lounging in a corner, looking dangerous and sexy.
Yeah, very sexily leaning on a pillar.
Yeah, like, that's the standout moment to me.
No, it's so true. Egg, like, looks across, and there he is, just...
And everyone's like,
being so
Talmanes!
sexy and dangerous and
This
French.
5-foot-tall man.
It is very powerful, and Egg is kind of like, hey, don't go fight in Murundi. And he's like, hey, where's
Fuck
Matt?
yourself. I
very-
am gonna go fight in Murundi. Fuck yourself very much.
Yeah, it's a very powerful moment from him, and she's like, I kind of thought I could tell him what to do.
And
He's like,
Talmanes
nope.
is like, no. Exactly one Taviran in this bitch gets to tell me what to do, and it's not you.
It's not you.
But then Edwene maneuvers the Hall of the Tower into declaring war on Eleda, which, due to some long-ignored fine print in Tower law, means that she has war powers, which basically means that the executive branch of the government has a lot more power. Mm-hmm. So that sort of has the ripple effect of showing everyone that she's not necessarily some puppet. She's a 20-year-old with power, or whatever. I don't know how old she is.
Sure, 20.
But this also means that she can move things forward at a much greater momentum, including, it would seem, traveling then all the way to Tarvalon.
Yeah.
So, smash cut to now, Crossroads of Twilight. Edwene is standing, looking through a spyglass with Gareth Bryne looking at the river through which boats bring both goods and soldiers into Tarvalon, which is an island city, of course. So, and passage from the river into, like, the harbor of Tarvalon is controlled by means of a harbor chain, which just stretches across the mouth of the harbor and can be lowered or lifted to prevent people from coming through. This harbor chain is a point of interest in Crossroads of Twilight, though not necessarily in a way that makes itself clear until the end of the book. I remember when you were reading this book and we're like, they keep talking about the fucking harbor chain. And I was like, ooh.
Thanks for not spoiling it for me. I'm sorry, I was so annoying about the harbor chain.
No, it was very funny.
It's just like, well, I don't get it.
Well, I agree that Robert Jordan has a bad habit of keeping the weirder secrets from his readers in ways that aren't necessarily satisfying. But since we do have a disclaimer about spoilers, we'll just tell you Egg's big plan to actually put Tarvalon under siege, because as it stands, and as Gareth Bryne points out, they are not holding the city under siege. They can't prevent boats from getting in and leaving, unless they want to start using the power to attack boats, which, since they're Aes Sedai, they won't do. Because Egg is like, if I blew up one of the boats and even one guy drowned, then that would be using the weapon as a power. And I'm like, as though explosions aren't weapons. Like,
yeah, as though it, like, has to lead in death.
Yeah.
Like, to death for you to have broken that rule.
it's only a weapon if you've killed someone.
Dies.
Never mind if someone got maimed.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Or, yeah.
Lost
just
their livelihood.
Yeah.
Whatever.
It's so silly. She's also, we can stick with the harbor chains for a second, and then I can make my point.
Okay, hold it. Yeah, the harbor chains are sort of Egg's point of interest in that if she and some trusted helpers can turn the harbor chain into Quendiar Heartstone, the thing that the seals on the Dark One's prison are made out of, then that will make it, like, impossible to move, lower, lift, whatever. It will just mean that the only way to get it off is by, like, literally removing the parts of the wall to which it is attached.
Right.
So that would prevent at least big boats with big shipments of food and grain from entering the city, and that would actually put Tarvalon under siege in the traditional sense.
Yeah, and the big reveal in the second chapter is that Egg herself has learned how to make Quendiar.
Yeah,
it's one of her little discoveries.
Which she's like, I don't mind people praising me for it because I did discover it myself. And then she tells us for like a paragraph about how actually Moghedien did give her the foundation for learning about it, but she doesn't credit Moghedien with it because she technically pieced it together on her own.
It's like, okay. Intellectual theft right and left from these three.
Anyway, that's it on the harbor chain.
Yeah, another thing that happens is Egg is like, one, she's like, I'm not gonna blow up boats, because what if someone dies? And two, she's like, I refuse. Gareth Bryne keeps being like, we could win this super easy if you just let me and my soldiers teleport directly into Tarvalon, and we could take the city. He's like, it wouldn't be like super easy, but it'll be much easier if we do it now than if we just keep letting them bring in soldiers and supplies and etc. And Egg has this, like, monologue about how, like, upsetting it is that Gareth Bryne immediately saw teleportation and decided to use it as a weapon of war. And it's like, she does have the caveat. She's like, well, he is a general, so of course this is how he thinks. And it's like, yeah.
What are you paying him for?
Yeah, it's like, you paid him to do a good job.
Yeah.
And now you're upset that he wants to do a really good job. And he's just he's not asking you to do literally anything except open a gateway. And she's like, I'm not comfortable with that, blah, 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 blah. She has some reasoning about how she doesn't want Aes Sedai to end up fighting each other in the streets, and I'm like, how does that even apply?
I mean, my big point there, I mean, let's dissect this a little bit. First of all, I do think there are some ethical gray areas in Gareth Bryne's idea to use gateways to teleport in and take the city.
Sure.
In that the Aes Sedai have this big oath about using the power as a weapon. At what point are you using the power as a weapon? Or when you're aiding and abetting soldiers who are going to be killing people? Does that count?
Good point, Emily.
But that's not Egg's point. Egg's point is that there's a difference between the type of violence that Gareth Bryne is proposing, in that Aes Sedai could potentially be fighting each other in the streets. And soldiers will, of course, be fighting each other on Aes Sedai's behalfs, and the type of violence that she is proposing, which is putting a city under siege, in which people, not Aes Sedai, will then be faced with starvation. So that's obviously a problem, and I hate to say that I side with Gareth Bryne on anything, but obviously I side with Gareth Bryne because what he's proposing is the most efficient and probably, like, the least costly in terms of casualties form of getting the job done.
Totally.
And certainly the least costly in terms of civilian life.
Yeah.
From a narrative standpoint, what Robert Jordan is trying to do is say that there has to be some sort of third option. Because right now...
Okay.
Right now, motorcycles are just... okay, manhood. Gasoline. Guns.
I drink gasoline and bullets for breakfast.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. So what Robert Jordan is trying to do from a narrative standpoint is say that none of Egg's options are good.
Right.
Whatever she does in this is going to be something that either she is uncomfortable with, or that does serious damage to Tarvalon and its citizens, or to Aes Sedai as a system, which is what Egg wants to avoid because she's the Amerlin seat, and she's a good Amerlin seat, so she cares about the Aes Sedai as a whole. And typically when an author proposes that all the options are bad, what they're saying is, okay, at some point a third option will be found. Which is, sorry to spoil it for you, more or less what happens. There will still be, like, some violence, etc., but more or less there will be a more peaceful solution than what is being proposed here due to what happens at the end of this book, which is Egg getting kidnapped. Snatched by the Aes Sedai and the White Tower, and then she's able to sort of wage, I don't know, psychological warfare on Aleda.
Yeah.
Do work from the inside. And, I don't have a big problem with that, except that I'm irritated that all of Robert Jordan's female characters stumble their way into success. Mm-hmm. It was so nice in Path of Daggers, probably one of the only good things about Path of Daggers, watching Egg do something intentionally and succeed, even if it's something that I don't necessarily agree with, like the executive branch of a government having war powers.
Yeah.
It was nice because, like, Egg set out to do something, she did it. It had real, palpable consequences.
Totally.
And it's also similarly satisfying to watch Egg once she's in the White Tower, because what she does and what she starts doing has real consequences that are something she's working toward.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to propose is that Egg could do all this intentionally.
Yeah.
She could intentionally get herself kidnapped by the White Tower. She could set it up. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't even be that difficult. She knows that Nicola, who's the one who ends up betraying her, spoiler alert, is a loudmouth who's willing to sell her information to anyone.
Anything.
Literally anyone. As long as they'll indulge her, like, weird ambitions.
Yeah.
So, and, like, it's not ideal that she leaves the Salidar Aes Sedai to their own devices, but that's also something she could set up.
Yeah.
She at least has people working with her, Swan and Leanne and whatever. So, that's my grievance against this big plot. It irritates me that this can't be something that Egg thinks of on her own.
Totally. And I also, like, I don't quite know how to say this, so stay with me, play with me in this space for a minute, everybody.
Play with me.
It is not, caveat, obviously, you know, this is a very anti-war podcast. We're not like, yes, do war.
Yeah.
It's the best. But Robert Jordan is doing, it's frustrating that we seem to have this with almost every single one of the female characters, except perhaps Tuan. It's like they get in situations of power and then they are, like, unwilling to use it, particularly in regards to, like, military power. Like, Elaine has, like, weird things about using an army and about, like, attacking people. She's just got, like, a lot of weird, like, holdups there. Egg obviously has a lot of weird holdups about, like, doing war. And it's like, I understand that, but it's very frustrating for Robert Jordan to keep putting these women in situations where they are, like, leaders of countries or quasi-countries and, like, not willing to act as a military head in the way that they're supposed to. And it just, like, it's just really frustrating that it keeps happening, and it, I feel like especially in the second half of the book, like, Robert Jordan is just, like, making me hate the female characters, and it feels like I'm just being a huge misogynist, but it's like, why isn't Egg doing things intentionally, you know, like, why isn't she stepping up to the plate in this regard? If she was, like you say, doing some sort of, like, espionage, that would be fine, but it's like, make a tough decision. I'm sorry that both decisions are really shitty, but you're in charge now and you have to make a tough decision. Are you going to, 1, starve a bunch of civilians to death, or 2, deal with a little bit of warfare in the middle of your city?
Yeah, and interestingly, I think Elaine and Edwene have extremely similar situations here, where both of their reasoning behind avoiding military action is that they don't want to have this group that they're trying to unite. Aes Sedai in Edwene's case, Andorans in Elaine's case, they don't want them fighting each other.
Right.
But in both those cases, the cost of soldiers not fighting each other is civilian life.
Yeah.
And I don't know what Robert Jordan was thinking, what his overall thesis about war was. Obviously, he was okay with writing about it and depicting it. But I do think there is, on some level, an element to his writing of the idea that war is horrible.
Of course.
And awful and traumatic, and it should be avoided at all costs. And so, but the fact that he's giving these plots about trying to avoid war to his female characters specifically has an element of, 1, making the women especially seem incredibly naive.
Right.
And also, like, putting them on sort of a weird pedestal.
Right.
Like, they're not going to get their hands dirty. They're women.
Totally, and it also puts the onus of avoiding warfare entirely on women, where, like, Rand is literally controlling multiple countries and could just, like, stop war with a wave of his hand, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, like, frustrating that they have to do all this, like, peace labor about it, and it is, I think the naivete is what is frustrating to me. Like, he's setting Elaine and Egg up as these leaders, but of course they are, like, young women who are unwilling to engage in something, and it's like, I'm not saying they have to. It is interesting that they are trying to find different solutions, but it's like, why isn't Rand and also trying to find different solutions? Why is Perrin literally selling slaves to the Shanshin because he cannot find a solution that does not involve killing all the Shadow? You know, like, why do they have to be the ones that do it? It's just really upsetting to me.
Like, while Elaine and Egg are losing sleep over soldiers dying on their behalf, Rand, literally, his reasoning in Path of Daggers for attacking the Shanshin the way they did in a massively costly engagement was that he brought on his side people he wanted to get rid of. Mm-hmm. He was like, these are all the guys that I don't like, so it isn't a big deal if they just get killed.
Yeah.
And Perrin is doing some, like, human war crimes shit over in this weird region. And Matt is inventing cannons.
Yeah.
None of them have any qualms, it would seem, about getting their military shit done.
Yeah.
In fact, it would behoove Robert Jordan to take some of the qualms from Edwin and Elaine and spread them out a little bit.
Yeah.
So that our men characters seem less like violent sociopaths.
Totally. And, like, our women characters they don't just have to exist in, like you said, this idyllic, peaceful, womanly headspace. Like, I want all of our characters to exist in reality, which is that peace is, of course, the option you should be working for, and you should be really legitimately upset that people are dying. But, like, you do live in the real world. So, like, are you going to starve all your civilians to death, or are you going to let soldiers who signed up for the army fight?
Yeah, like, Edwin's holding, okay, yeah, maybe her espionage thing as a solution would be cool, though with many, many risks and variables that would be hard to control. Much more interesting would be to see a narrative wherein she says, okay, Gareth Bryne, do your job, and then actually has to struggle with what that means.
Yeah.
Like, how do you bring the White Tower back together after that? Do you do some, like, sort of propaganda machine to make sure that the citizenry of Tarvalon doesn't turn against you? Like,
yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. There are interesting things to be talked about there. It's just, we're stuck in this weird woman space.
Woman space. One other thing I want to say, which is kind of related, but like you said, Robert Jordan is definitely willing to write about warfare and how it's bad, but I feel like a lot of people who write about how warfare is bad, especially if they themselves had experience in war like Robert Jordan did, seem to really center how warfare is bad for soldiers, like how traumatic it is to fight in a war, which is obviously extremely true and nobody should have to do it, but there's not the same attention given to how warfare is traumatic and deadly to civilians and economies and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. So, like, this focus of, like, avoiding warfare, or the men being like, we just have to deal with the trauma that we're getting from this. I lost my point. Anyway, it's just, yeah, it just all seems to be about these soldiers and not wanting the actual warring bodies to fight and avoiding what that does to them and what that does to political institutions. Like, what Egg is choosing is basically, like, the sanctity of the White Tower as an institution over the lives of the people she is actually supposed to protect. The Aes Sedai are technically part of the government with her, mm-hmm. which she doesn't always seem to think. She very much holds herself above them, which in some instances she is, but much like the President of the United States, she is not supposed to be the whole body of the government.
Yeah.
But she has very much set herself up that way by getting war powers, and she very much thinks of herself that way. Or she probably would not have struggled so hard to get them. So,
woof.
That's Egg. You're so smart.
No, you're so smart.
It's just a frustrating little plot.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in those these chapters, I guess.
Just being like, don't use teleporting. And it's like, why was it invented if no one's going to use it for anything? I don't want it to be used for warfare, but like...
Yeah, like, not to be the shoulder devil here, but you have a very, one hopes, small window in which to use teleportation willy-nilly before hopefully, I emphasize, God only hopes that some sort of, like, Geneva Conventions will be placed around it, you know?
Yeah.
But until then, go crazy.
Yeah, and she's so intense about being like, you cannot open gateways where literally anybody could see them. They have, like, very secret traveling rounds. And so it's like, why hold the secret so tightly if all you're using it for is to send people off on little research missions?
Ugh.
And again, I don't want you to do war crimes and use weapons of war, but it is just, like, an incomprehensible plot to me that teleportation was invented and is not used to make fighting easier, to make traveling easier, to move supplies, to go ask Rand for help.
Like, to get rid of communication, transportation, all sorts of plot problems. Like, how is it that we're in the second half of this series? Teleportation is now a thing, but everything has become slower and worse.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, you can basically just use it as a cell phone. Or teleport over to Rand and be like, hey, Dragon Reborn, what do you think about this? But they're like,
no.
Let's just use it to send the brown nausea to various libraries.
Or whatever the fuck is going on.
So,
anyway, in terms of actual plot, Elaine and Gareth Bryne have that conversation. It is a miracle that Gareth Bryne does not quit on the spot.
I know.
Because if I were him, I'd be like, why?
Why am I here then?
Yeah, he's like the epitome of someone who has been hired to do a job and then has bad managers being like, but don't do it in the best way. Just do it in the way I say. He's like, great, I'm just going to watch people that I've trained die because of your decisions. And Elaine's, Edwina's not even, like, explaining her reasoning to him. I mean, she explains her whole bit about the sanctity of the White Tower, but she's not like, what I'm hoping to accomplish here with the harbor chains is something that will actually save your soldiers' lives, you know?
Right.
Da-da-da-da-da. Here's what I actually need from you. Blah, 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 blah. So, they head back around. Edwina meets up with the people who she's riding with, which happens to be the 6 women who have been so important in Salidar. As she's meeting up with them, Delana, Whomst I Hate, comes riding up, and Edwin's like, yeah, Delana's confusing because, like, she's in the hall of the tower, and her secretary is my, like, weird sex masseuse lady, and happens to be one of the Forsaken who's giving me my migraines, but don't worry, I'm not worried about that. And Delana just does all these very confusing things in the government, and no one can make any sense of it. And Delana comes up and tells Edwina, listen, so what I'm hearing is that some people in the hall are talking about opening up negotiations with Aleda. Blah, 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 blah. And she's like, now, what we don't want is for that to get around. And it's like, clearly she has all these ulterior motives and is double speaking, triple speaking in all these layers. And Edwina is just like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So she drags Delana back to the other 6 and is like, tell them what you told me. And Delana's like, negotiations. And they're all like, outrageous. We would never negotiate with Aleda because the terms would be so unreasonable.
Right.
And Bayanin, who's the Grey Aja, is like, well, what if we, tried?
Yeah.
Never say never, am I right? And then Egg is like, sure, go ahead, start negotiations. And everyone's like, Wilhelm scream in the background. Yeah. And Egg's like, but these are my terms. Aleda has to be exiled. Which is basically a way of saying that you can open negotiations, but absolutely nothing will come of them.
Right.
Which I think the text does a bad job of explaining to us. Bayanin faints because it's not a scene with a bunch of Aes Sedai unless someone's fainting or throwing up, literally.
Yeah, we also can't, we as readers are not smart enough to parse when Egg has made a savvy political decision, so Robert Jordan has to let us know by someone fainting.
I know. This never happens in male-dominated political
Otherwise,
spaces.
I would truly have no idea that Egg was intelligent and making moves.
I'm also like, I just don't get it, because I don't know Robert Jordan hasn't explained well enough to me what Egg is going for here.
Right.
Whatever. Delana leaves, and they all talk and are like, okay, what was she actually after? And one of them very astutely is like, she's clearly trying to cause, like, mayhem and chaos between all of the Ajas, if not inside the Ajas themselves, you know, like, who knows what's going on here. And someone else is like, well, no, any other number of things could be going on here. And it's like, no one's willing to take everyone sort of agrees with the initial assumption, like, yeah, the only thing that can be gained here is chaos. You'd have to be an idiot to handle things the way that she did, unless that was your end goal.
Right.
And we, the readers, know that Delana is Black Aja. That she is under the thumb of Halima, aka Arangar, aka Balthamel Reborn. And we know that she's in some sort of extremely odd psychosexual relationship with Halima, because that's Robert Jordan's whole kink.
Yeah.
And basically that she's probably being tortured at every opportunity. So we know that she's making decisions that will serve only the bad guys. Mm-hmm. What's confusing is why in this group of women no one says, so who does this benefit?
Right.
Absolutely no one. Therefore, perhaps we should suspect Delana of being evil in some way.
Yeah.
I know none of us likes to talk about it, and I know some of us are also Black Aja, looking at you, Shiriam, but, like, perhaps that's a possibility?
Yeah, or even just being like, maybe she's a spy for Aleda. It doesn't, you don't immediately have to jump to
Black Aja.
You could be like, why does she have these motives to make our system fall apart? You know, we have multiple enemies.
Yeah.
Like, perhaps we should consider that she works for one of them.
But no one is even like, let's keep eyes on her, or let's somehow deal with the problem in some other way. Let's arrange an accident, as Swan would say. I know they would never actually propose killing another Aes Sedai, but it would be so funny if they did. It would be super funny.
I think they should let Swan Sanche do some killing.
No, Swan Sanche is just like, let's just kill some people who clearly are helping the plot in any way and are clearly deterring the plot.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, no, Swan! And I'm like, maybe? Let her go crazy.
Like, if Swan is going to be this insufferable person who does not believe in the sanctity of human life, maybe utilize that.
Yeah, Swan is over here operating in Game of Thrones land, while everyone over here is still in Chronicles of Narnia. Like,
right.
I'm not saying it's a good thing, but maybe let her do her thing, if that's what it's gonna be.
Right. Like, Egg does have a hilarious line when everyone is like, later, everyone's like, Nicola is truly the worst. We hate this 17-year-old girl more than we hated anyone in our whole lives.
And nothing good can come of her. And Egg is like, maybe I should have let Swan kill her. What am I thinking? And I'm like, you're thinking the right thing. Maybe you should have let Swan kill her. She's literally going to betray you. Yeah.
And everyone hates her, and
nothing good.
I'm not saying you should just kill someone because you hate them, but
I am saying that this is fantasy fiction and characters should maybe sometimes kill people.
Yeah, like, Robert Jordan really wants to walk this fine line of our good guys are good.
Except he's only doing that with the female characters.
He's only doing that with the female characters, totally. But also, like, our good guys are good, except sometimes. You know, except when Egg wants to starve the people of Tarvalon. Except when Perrin wants to sell as many people as he wants to the Shan-Chen because it's so important that he gets his wife. And I know people are gonna argue with me and say, like, these are intended to be, like, moral gray areas to make complex characters. But our characters are never presented as gray area characters. They are always framed within the narrative as being good and just. And that means sometimes they have to make bad decisions and hard decisions, but they never, ever, ever get any consequences from the narrative of being, like, morally gray.
Yeah, there's absolutely no problem with writing a story in which your characters are like, hey, I'm going to be making some morally ambiguous decisions because that is what the narrative is forcing me to do.
Totally.
Okay, yeah, that's fine, but you're the one in control of the narration, Robert. Mm-hmm. Like, you get to choose how it treats them after they make these decisions. Not saying that everyone needs to be punished for making bad decisions, but then again, that is what you have set us up to do. Everyone who is a bad guy does get punished. Mm-hmm. So why are people who are making some good, some bad decisions not, facing consequences?
Yeah, it is, like, truly mind-boggling that Perrin gets put on trial by the White Cloaks for killing 2 guys in book 1 and not collaborating with the invading fascist empire.
Yeah, the consequences are never related to the crimes.
Yeah, and, like, I haven't gotten to this plot, so I might just be kind of, like, talking out my ass here, but, like, putting Perrin on trial for, like, killing 2 people in book 1 is ultimately still framing him as a bad guy because as a good guy, because he's willing to, like, face justice for this thing that he did that he wasn't totally in control of, but, like, he understands the reasoning. And so it's like, what the fuck is happening?
Even just if characters had a modicum of self-awareness.
Yeah, if Egg was like, I know what a siege means. Mm-hmm. And that is, it's shitty, but it's a consequence I'm willing to pay.
Or just like, I am probably gonna lose sleep about having Delana murdered, you know? But I really do genuinely think that's the best decision at this time.
Yeah. And it's like, okay.
Okay, that's what you're doing with power.
But it's just so frustrating that our bad guys get to commit war crimes. Rand. And Perrin and Matt and everybody, but it's still like some of our dark friends are much better people than our main characters are, actually.
Yeah, shocking.
Anyway, we can finish up with the plot. I've really run my mouth today.
No, you're fine. Anyway, they all discuss this, come to no real conclusions. Egg is like, yeah, you can actually open negotiations with Elena, and that will maybe serve us as a delaying tactic. So she sort of puts Bayonet in charge of that, which is a mistake. That will come back to haunt everyone, but we'll see that in the future. Meanwhile, everyone goes their separate ways once they get back to the camp. Edwene sort of takes the opportunity to wander on her own and ends up at this tent where people are making Quendiar both as an economic thing, like they can sell it, it's extremely valuable.
You're right.
But Egg has this ulterior motive of being like, I need to discover who is powerful enough to make Quendiar quickly so I can find some assistance in this harbor chain scheme that I've concocted.
Not that she'll take it.
And so far, she tells us that her best candidates are Leanne and this randomized that I named Karen. Mm-hmm. Literally Karen, who isn't enthused about making Quendiar on the side. Like, if you are able to do it, then you are required to put in an hour at the tent to help keep the camp running from an economic standpoint, which I think is funny. And Karen hates it. And Egg's like, if I told her what it was for, then maybe she'd be more enthused, but, like, I just need to keep all my secrets.
I can't trust anybody.
Yeah,
It's
blah,
like,
blah,
you
blah,
have
blah.
to you have to trust some people.
We're also told that Bode Cathan, Matt's younger sister, who has entered the tower as a novice, is also up there in the candidates, but Egg is not considering her because she is a novice. But that will come back in the plot. That's sort of the only thing that plot-wise happens. Updates we get in terms of the camp at Salidar are that the novices have been sort of reorganized under the watchful eye of a woman named Sharina?
I think so, yeah.
Sharina, who's an elderly woman who would never have been able to join the White Tower under the previous prescriptions, but they have opened the books. That's another thing that happened in Path of Daggers, so they've seen a massive influx of novices, and since none of them can take the test to become accepted, it's just like this extremely bottom-heavy power structure.
Yeah, there's just like 900 of them.
Yeah, like almost 1,000, which is as many as there are Aes Sedai.
Yeah.
Which is, for the future, a good thing.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a huge logistical problem in this moment. And this woman named Sharina had the bright idea, like, hey, maybe we wouldn't have novices who are running away, burning out, getting super depressed and upset if we didn't, like, enforce isolation on them.
Yeah.
At every opportunity. If instead of this, like, weird Catholic boarding school structure, we allowed them to structure themselves into units called families, where everyone is sort of looking out for each other. So there's this weird power struggle going on between Sharina, who clearly has it all figured out because she's an older woman with experience and wisdom, one can assume, and the actual Mistress of Novices, who is also a woman with age and experience, but doesn't look like one.
Therefore, we can't trust her.
And also, I don't know, one of them is stuck in the way things were, and one of them has creative problem-solving ideas. It's very uninteresting. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's just, like, this weird, like, little subplot where Robert Jordan is, like, playing with this tension of, like, the wisdom of age and the, like, I don't know, you said exactly, like, creative problem solving versus, like, letting people who have different life experiences at different ages come into the White Tower and, like, how that is a good thing versus Aes Sedai being like, you only can come in if you are under 18 and then we're going to indoctrinate you.
Yeah, seriously, into our structure.
Yeah.
That's sort of the main thing going on. Otherwise, we're just, like, no, that's it. I think we have covered every point of interest. We'll be with Egg for a few more chapters, so we'll get more of her goings-on, including more interactions with Siuan and sort of what her day-to-day life is looking like. Supplies are running thin because they're all getting rotten and gross, thanks to the Dark One's taint. And I don't know, we'll get more about the ominous Halima, headache dispenser and remover, which is exactly as stupid a subplot as you can imagine.
I don't understand the point of it.
It's very annoying.
And Egg, when she gets captured, is like, wow, my headaches have gone away. That's so
interesting. Oh my god, I know. Egg is astounding for being this medical marvel.
Yeah.
Who's like, I'm getting these awful headaches and not seeking any sort of treatment beyond the tender love of Halima.
Yeah.
Which, like, could be explained, and others of Egg's decisions could be explained if Halima is putting her under compulsion, but that is not something that is ever answered or pointed at directly, so we're left to believe, well, maybe Egg's just an idiot. Which is frustrating, of course.
Yeah, which is exhausting. It's like, you can't tell me that she's one of the smartest characters in the series and also tell me that she is this incapable of solving little problems. Like, maybe I should talk to one of the Yellow Aja about healing or medicine or teas or anything that could help with this.
Maybe I should call it my friend Nynaeve, or even just, like, I don't know, it just is frustrating because her current treatment plan is something that clearly isn't working.
Yeah, like, she's still getting headaches. And, like, we can talk about this later. Obviously, we're kind of running up against time here. But, like, if you have an actual chronic condition, sometimes things just don't work.
Yeah, sometimes you just need relief rather than a cure.
Yeah, like, truly, like, especially if you get migraines, this is, to the best of my knowledge, there are, like, very few things and very few medicines that actually help people with migraine disorder. And it's like, okay, but, like, let's see Egg maybe, like, trying a few things out before she lands on the fact that, like, hey, these massages that I get are the only things that provide some relief. Versus being like, these are truly horrific to do. It's also, like, a little bit unbelievable. Like, if you are dealing with symptoms that are so debilitating, of course you're gonna try different things. To be like, I want them to go away. I don't want to just have to get massaged by this kind of creepy woman every night. Like,
well, and of course you'd be, like, freaked out. Like, what's going on with me? Is this a terminal condition? Do I have a brain tumor? Maybe brain tumors don't exist in Wheel of Time world, but, like, if you're a young person who's never dealt with a chronic illness up until this point, you'd probably be like, wonder what's going on here.
I should go to the doctor.
I'm not just going to take it into stride.
It's just a very weird plot that is more of Robert Jordan's bad disability representation.
Yeah. Anyway, that's those 2 chapters. We'll be back with Egg next week as well. Thanks to Glenna McKenzie for our theme song. Thanks to our patrons on Patreon and our followers on social media.
You guys are the best.
Yeah, do you have a sign-off?
We have a listener submitted sign-off, but it's on my phone, so I'll do that next week, I promise. I'm not forgetting you. I don't have any, like, bad, funny sign-off, so here's a good sign-off. My niece, Liz, who is 6, is in Taekwondo.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And she did a test yesterday to see if she could upgrade the color of her belt.
Ooh.
And she passed.
Woo!
So she has now a yellow stripe on her taekwondo belt. So good job,
yeah.
Liz. My brother sent me the funniest video of her breaking, like, it's obviously like a very thin, like, piece of plywood that all these 6-year-olds are breaking with their little taekwondo punches. But she hit the shit out of that thing.
Yeah, I've always known Liz would be able to kick our asses one
Yeah.
day, but, like, it's a little terrifying that she will actually have, like, the education behind it. Not just sheer power.
Not just sheer power and will, but she's
Yeah.
being trained in a martial art.
Well, good job, Liz.
Yeah, good job, Liz.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.